Welcome to the Recruiting Stories podcast, where we celebrate recruiting by exploring the stories of leaders and top performers by digging into their stories and understanding how recruiting has impacted their journey and their success. Hey guys, welcome to another edition of the Recruiting Stories podcast powered by Cover 3 Consulting. Really excited about this episode. We've got Sean Richardson, Vice President of Growth and Development at Tallgrass Freight. Sean's a friend of mine. We had a chance to work together at one point in time, and we're going to talk through his journey going from a college baseball athlete playing for the University of Kansas, going through, starting his career in financial services, ending up in transportation, and how he's become a leader in the transportation industry now. Sean's the type of guy that you can always learn something from. He's always encouraging, and he's a wealth of knowledge. I'm looking forward to sharing this episode with you. So hopefully you learned something, you get encouraged as well. And if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to Sean on LinkedIn or me on LinkedIn or emailing me at adrian@cov3consulting.com. All right, welcome to the Recruiting Stories podcast. I'm super excited today. Welcome to the podcast, Sean Richardson.
Hey, Adrian. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. So if you guys don't know Sean, Sean is currently the Vice President of Growth and Development for Tallgrass Freight. He's an industry vet. He's been around for about 12 years for a couple of different firms. Sean, would you mind just kind of giving folks kind of the high-level view of your background in the industry?
Sure. So I guess going back to how I got into the freight industry, obviously I didn't grow up thinking I was going to be a freight broker, didn't go to college thinking I was going to be a freight broker. But, once I got out of school, I did what a lot of people did is I got into the financial services industry, and I did that for about 3 years and, learned a lot of good, valuable tools and best practices. But through a colleague I met through there, he actually had referred me over to one of the large brokerages here in the Kansas City metro area. And, I was looking for a change. I knew I didn't want to do financial services. And then so I kind of got into freight there. I started off as a producer on the sales side. And for whatever reason, I love the industry. I got the B2B sales, after a little while of kind of learning about how everything works and, how we could, how best help people with regards to logistics. I kind of got some, plans and best practices in place that allowed me to be successful and move on. So I was with them for about 6 years as a sales role, as a sales rep, and then moved over to the management side for the last 2.5 years before moving on to another local brokerage here in Kansas City, which I was there for about 3.5 years. And before coming over to Tallgrass Freight, I was managing, inside sales for them and a little bit on the truckload development side. And then, kind of like everybody, I've always had that inclination in the back of my mind, like what would it be like if you could run your own brokerage? And obviously I'd weighed a bunch of different options in terms of creating my own freight brokerage and then the agent side as well too. And I'd obviously Tallgrass Freight. I've known a lot of people that have gone over there, been really successful. I've known the ownership there for a number of years. So I decided to take the risk and bet on myself and go over there. Ran my own independent agency for about 2.5 years. And then I was approached by the two owners of Tallgrass if I wanted to move over to an executive position and help the agents with overall growth, business practice, how to get them onboarded, what can we do to help them ramp up and just kind of be a resource for them. And I've been doing that now for the last 6 months.
Awesome. Congrats on that opportunity and of course the growth. I want to loop back to kind of some of the startup, how you got into that, Sean. So you talked about, getting in after college, you jumped into financial services. How much did that prepare you, or did it at all, to get into transportation? Was it a situation where you were like, man, I didn't like that at all, so yeah, that prepared me, or were there elements of that prepared you to jump into freight and freight brokerage?
Sure. I look back at those times, being the financial services rep. One, it was stressful. My wife and I have been married for 12 years now. But I was in the process of getting engaged. I was driving to and from Kansas City to Topeka 3 or 4 times a week. And that was back, I don't know, remember 2007, 2008, there's a bit of a crisis going on. And I remember when gas was $4 a gallon and then you're spending a lot of your cash just going to and from Topeka. So it was a very stressful time, but man, I look back on it now and I learned so much from it. One of the biggest things I was fortunate enough to, I had a really good mentor and manager by the name of Mike Rude. And what Mike did is he just took me under his wing and he's like, hey, this is how you build a sales funnel. This is how you work a sales process. And he got me used to making calls on the phone. Because, I mean, back then we would make calls at night. You'd make calls during the week, but you had to get 20 appointments. Mm-hmm. But then you would make calls at night. Tuesdays and Thursdays, you were setting appointments up for the following week. And you had to make 700 to 1,000 calls every single week in order to get enough people. So, just building that foundation of not being afraid to pick up the phone. Now, don't get me wrong. When I first started, picking up that phone was like the last thing I wanted to do. And you just kind of fought
phone
through.
Was heavy, right? Phone was heavy.
Phone was heavier. There's a great sticker out there. If you want to make money, pick up the phone. That's how you make money. And, it just really got ingrained in me, what the sales process is like, not being afraid to pick up the phone, understanding, hey, it's just having a conversation and you're really just trying to find out, hey, am I a good fit for them? And are they a good fit for me? And then just have a conversation about it. So I look back on those years getting started on the professional side. I was very, very thankful that I went through it and I did it for 3 years. And it really, again, put in the basic fundamentals of what I needed. And I was able to carry that over, when I went into my first freight broker role in terms of being able to pick up the phone and find customers. So yeah, it was definitely a learning experience. But I always look back on that. And if I didn't meet Mike Rood and he didn't take me under his wing and spend time out of his day, because he's got a family, he's got a practice he was working at. I mean, it could be a whole different story.
Totally, absolutely. And so that connection obviously helped you learn how to sell, right? And then you said you had a friend who told you about the transportation industry, and you decided to jump into that world. What was that process like? Just learning freight brokerage and jumping into something completely new? Because I think that happens to a lot of people in the industry, right? I always kind of joke around that, like, and I've heard other people say, you don't choose freight chooses you, right? You just kind of it pulls you in, and a lot of people get grabbed into, and they just stay in the industry, and it's a great industry. So tell me what that was like.
Yeah, so getting into freight, I didn't know what an LTL was. I didn't know what a truckload was. For my mind, I would see these, and I would always call them, semis driving down the road all the time, and I just say, obviously, someone's doing something to get freight from point A to point B. So, it's very interesting learning about the industry from the get-go. How freight moves. How prices are determined. What are some of the roadblocks you see in the shipping industry, and how can you avoid those to make the process as smooth as possible? So, like anything, everyone's got their horror stories about setting up a shipment or having a load go terribly wrong. But what did you learn from it? And then with that, being able to leverage the people you had around you, the veterans, again, kind of like who I had with Mike when I first got into the industry. My first manager in freight, Thomas Walker, was basically a backbone for me there. Setting up, hey, this is what happens. If you got a question, problem, come see me. I'll talk you through it. And it's not do this. He talked me through it. Like, this is why we're doing it this way. This is why we want to handle it. And, every shipment is an experience, and as you get more and more ingrained with freight, you always hear about the worst case scenarios that happen with shipments, stuff, goes missing, whatever the case may be. And you always kind of just look back like, man, it's amazing that still 99.9% of freight picks up and delivers on time without issues. It's usually those outliers that really become the fire that you're putting out. But, overall, I would just say, every new shipment, every new call was a learning experience, and you just got better, and, iron sharpens iron at that point.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned Thomas. He's a great guy. I know Thomas. Is there any other people that in your journey, just in the logistics world, that you feel like, hey, that person was really crucial to my development as I've gotten to where I am today? And what was that relationship like?
That's a good question. It's funny when you think back on all the interactions you've had, from a professional interaction to a personal interaction. Obviously what I learned out of my first freight position, and I was working over at Freight Quote, I learned a lot of good things, came away with a lot of good relationships there. But, going back to, working at East Shipping, where you and I were both co-workers at, I always look back at the way the CEO and owner of East Shipping ran things. Chad Irwood, I always thought set the precedent for one, how you handle yourself professionally, how you treat people,
Right.
How you get there matters, maximizing your potential. I still use that in my correspondence today when we're bringing on new agents. In terms of why are we doing this? You've had Chris Jolly on a previous podcast, and I remember, and I can't remember who he was interviewing, but the question was asked is, do you know who your great-great-grandfather was? And the answer was no. And it's like, because he didn't leave a legacy. What's your legacy going to be? And how are you going to do to shape that legacy? And I always go back to the, some of the principles I learned from Chad Earwood and the other executive team. Matt Weiss was in there as well too, in terms of, how you did things, how you went about your day and how you presented yourself mattered. And then even over at East Shipping, the thing that helped shape me as well too is just the team of professionals, I was fortunate enough to work with. I still keep in touch with a lot of them today, but we had some really, really sharp people that just did things right, that had a good internal drive and a hustle about them. And when you surround yourself with people like that, you only want to get better. It's a whole, you and I both play team sports. I don't want to let them down. I know every decision I make, how you respond to a difficult situation, because in freight, it's not a matter of if something's going to go wrong, it's when, but how do you handle it? Because that all reflects directly, not only yourself, but the rest of the team and the people you represent. So, those are the people I look back with now, as my career evolved and I was fortunate enough to have opportunities, not only to move on within the industry, but also work with just some tremendous people that I'll never forget.
No, I can echo the obviously the folks at East Shipping. I think that was the thing that stuck out to me as well was, there was almost a bigger purpose to everything that you do. And the idea that I'd not seen in business anywhere until I had been there. Not to say that it doesn't exist in other places, of course, but seeing that modeled by leaders, like you said, was interesting to me because, of course, man, I didn't want to let anybody down, right? And taking that and applying those principles, into life and work now have been awesome. You also talked about team sports too, which I think is important. If you guys don't know, Sean was a ball player. So you played at KU, right?
Rock Chalk, baby.
There you go. Okay. Tell me a little bit about that. That obviously probably helped prepare you. What did you learn just from playing, Division I baseball that really has translated into success in the business world as well?
Well, I was very fortunate enough to play, Division I baseball at the University of Kansas. And I went to junior college first. And I look at, the decision for me to go to junior college was probably one of the most important ones I've made in my life. Because coming out of high school, I was a decent athlete, but I wasn't and I'm sure they had star ratings back then, but just judging off the fact that I didn't know what star rating I was probably tells you enough of where I stood there. But, I had a local junior college that was very familiar with that I went to, but I could play right away. And I think that's a big thing. I was able to find a spot where I could play immediately and got the opportunity to come play at Kansas for 2 years. But, with sports, you played football. You're going to have a lot of tough days, and a lot of tough, conversations, with the coach about what you can do to get better and how you overcome that adversity, going through a slump in baseball. And I've been through slumps where, you feel like even if you knew the pitch was coming and they were throwing it to you underhand, you were going to swing and miss and fall down, and just trying to be mentally tough and fight your way through it. And then again, leverage your teammates, again, not to go back to that, but I had amazing teammates that I'm still very, very close with to this day that would pick you up when you would fall down and not try to undercut you, when they knew you were down in the dumps. But, taking those life lessons, having tough days, I'll never forget, I know you're a Mizzou guy, but we played against Missouri and I never forget the bases were loaded and I tried to back pick a guy at first and launched it over the first baseman's head and all 3 runs scored. And we ended up losing that game. And that still sticks out to me today because I remember just feeling just like, man, I let the whole team down. Sure. But you know what? Sure enough, we got back on that bus and it wasn't like that. A little pat in the back, hey, you'll get them next time. So it's all about adversity. And, I still try to channel that now when you're having those bad weeks where you feel like you're failing, you can't get anything done the way you wanted to, and just trying to recognize, okay, you're in one of those slumps. What are you going to do to control the situation? You can't be a victim and a leader. So you got to take control and take responsibility and fight your way out of it, which is, I think, a lot with D1 sports, and not just D1, but any kind of competitive activity will teach somebody.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate, that those words, because I relate well to the idea of like, the mistakes are going to happen, right? Whatever you do, but you can, I may have heard this, this might have been with Chase last week, but he talked a lot about, like, are you going to let that define you? Or are you going to define, who you are moving forward? And for me, that was always something that I had learned early in sports was like, okay, Even if I get beat on this play, well, I have a choice here. I can say, all right, I'm just a guy who gets beat, or I'm not good at this thing, or I can continue to practice. I might get beat a few more times until I figure out how to be good at that.
Yeah.
And then I define who I am instead of letting it define me.
Exactly. I mean, you're going to get knocked down over and over again, but the decision, the conscious, deliberate decision to get back up, learn from it, and then get after it again, and that's really going to define the person.
So talk to me then about, you talk about defined person, and you talked about teammates a lot. And I really appreciate, a guy like you who's, non-executive leadership position. You've led a lot of teams. You've talked about team over and over and over. Even as a guy who is the leader of the team, you talk about leaning on the people around you. Talk to me about, that you've built teams, you train people now. Do you have either like a recruiting philosophy or team building philosophy that you kind of adhere to or stick to at all?
Yeah, I guess on the team building side, with the number of teams I've been associated with, one of my main visions and goals was I wanted to create an environment where I felt like the team members could come, be themselves, but also thrive. They can take coaching, there's always going to be, constructive criticism, tips, things that we can get better on. But I always felt like it was up to me as a leader to create the environment where people wanted to be there. If you're ever involved in a team situation professionally, athletically, and it's toxic or it's not a place where you want to be, I mean, you're not going to be as engaged as you need to be successful. So that was always what I wanted to do first and foremost, is I needed to create the environment where people wanted to come in and then again could utilize their talents the best way they could. But then also, I would put them in place to do stuff that I would do myself as well too. So obviously with brokerage, being able to pick up the phone, and making cold calls and going out to find business, you can say it all you want, but kind of getting into the bullpen with them and jumping on and making calls and just saying, I'll take the first 30 minutes, you take the next 30 minutes, and we'll just keep rotating. And this is how I would do it. And then, being able to give some coaching tips along the way. You always had that mindset, never ask them to do something that you wouldn't do yourself. Yeah. And then I also, I would tell them, if you're having a bad day, if you're running into roadblocks, let's go grab lunch. Let's go, let's schedule an hour to go sit down and just talk, see what's going on. What are you seeing? Let's kind of talk about what we can do to maybe help remove some of these roadblocks for you and give you a chance to be as successful as you can. So from the team building side, you just want to make sure that they were at a place where they felt empowered, that they can actually take control of what they're doing and make a difference. On the recruiting side, it's you're always trying to target the right person. Especially now where we're at with Tallgrass Freight, we're not really an entry level position. We really try to go after some of the best talent in the industry, especially with people coming over and basically having the opportunity to run their own brokerage the way they would see fit. You've got to have a sound, background, not only just in logistics, but you got to have a good business acumen as well. How are you going to get there? What's your plan? How are you going to execute that plan? What are you going to do when you have a roadblock? Like Mike Tyson, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? What are you going to do then? And then it's all about, just talking through and kind of, really trying to get an understanding of who they are, not only just personally, but professionally as well too, and how they're going to get there. And then once they do come on board, it's up to me that, I've got to hold up my end of the bargain. Not try to oversell who we are, but try to give you a clear, transparent view of, what are we looking to accomplish? What are the resources out there for you? What are the expectations? Clear expectations of everybody I think are paramount to long-term success. And then just letting them know that they're not flying solo. Because I've been there. You have days, it's a Wednesday, you're building up a book of business and freight. You've made 100 cold calls. You've got 90 voicemails. You've got 8 hangups, and you've got 2, maybe I'll let you know. And it's like, how do I find gold out of that? How do I keep pushing myself to not let that, drag me down? Like I can't get this done. Like, no, every no is a lesson learned. And what are you going to take out of that into the next call? Because you got to be able to, make that call with a purpose, have a good understanding. What am I trying to accomplish here going forward? And then, turning that into the agency vibe in terms of the team environment, just making sure that they know that when you're having those days, call me. Chat about it. What's going on? Let's talk through it. What can we do? What have you learned? What else are you seeing? Let's put a plan in place and let's go execute and let's move forward.
I love a lot of the things you said, and I can attest to, watching you play those things out. But creating the environment people want to be, I think is so important. It's almost like the golden rule, like how would I want to be treated? I think is so important. And then you talked about setting clear expectations. We'll go back to one thing I heard, Chad Earwood say that I think was just really great, as simple as it was, he always would say, my role is to create clarity, and, that allows you to either commit or decommit. And as simple as that was, I was like, well, yeah, like as a leader, if you can create those really clear expectations, then there's no room for, I didn't know this, or I don't understand this. I'm always here to create clarity, which talked about. And then there's an element too of just kind of the motivation of kind of like, hey, let's get back on the horse, right? How do we keep riding when I'm having a terrible day, which I think everybody needs. I mean, especially you look at the last year, everything that we've had going on in the world. Everybody probably needs a pat on the back, in the past year or so here. So that's awesome.
Yeah, especially again, you're having one of those nightmare shipments, right? Freight's delayed, freight's lost. I mean, you name it. I mean, I always try to tell people, remember, we're not curing cancer. Lives are not on the line. Freight is freight. The best thing you can do when you are, you're in the middle of one of those situations is be proactive with it. When you have a tough shipment, especially if it's a newer customer that you've just brought on, there's no better chance to separate yourself from the competition versus how you handle that situation with that customer. You got to be able to make all the good calls with the bad calls. And you don't have to have every single answer for them right away, but you provide them a plan and how you're going to execute on it. Once everything gets resolved, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be in a better light with that customer after the fact than where you were at the beginning.
I love the idea of just the proactive, right? Like, let's just attack it head on. Right? Yeah. If something bad happens, you know what? Let's face the music. Let's get this over with, so we don't have to deal with anything tough later.
Exactly.
That's good. Well, cool. So tell me then, you've done some different things in the industry. Talk to me about Tallgrass, right? So, the agent model. For those out there who aren't aware of Tallgrass, give us kind of a little bit of a commercial there, just about what Tallgrass is about, why someone who's listening, who's like, man, I've been considering running my own agency. I'm not sure if I should do it. Kind of just some of the pros and cons there.
Sure. I mean, well, if you're considering starting your own agency, obviously you've got pros and cons. I mean, you're basically, running your own brokerage, without all the extra startup costs, getting your MC, getting your insurance, your authority, all that kind of stuff. But it's all about who you're going to partner up with. I was, fortunate really with Tallgrass, to one, know the ownership team, know what they're all about. And they're really big on providing a culture where people want to be. And it almost does become a family. When we have Christmas parties, to get together and celebrate the accomplishments of the year, you really get close to these people. So there's an emotional bond, and you want to see them all be successful. But when you're talking about partnering up with an agent program, especially with Tallgrass, we're very, very proud of what we've been able to accomplish, from our proprietary CRM that we're constantly making improvements on and developing, month over month, year over year, into the quality of agents and the success stories that we've been able to bring on. Agents that have come on board with us, and then after their first year, maybe they're debt free. They've been able to make a financial impact on themselves personally and their family. And you see these stories come to life, but it's partnering with someone that cares. And I'll go back to our owner and founder, Damon Anderson, who started it from scratch. And he still to this day, and I saw him yesterday morning, he gets down and will make cold calls with agents that are in the office. We have a home office here in Kansas City. He will jump on the phone with them and make phone calls. The owner of the company, he'll hammer out an hour with them. Again, always go back to the matter of, I'm going to not just tell you to do something, but I can show you how to do it as well too. So it's always really neat to see, especially when he gets involved like that. But when you're considering, who should I come to, what kind of resource do I have available to you? What are the expectations, and how are we going to do there? How are we going to get you to where you want to be? And that's usually where I come in play. Once we bring on agents and candidates, once they're through our training program, we'll get them involved and we'll start doing weekly calls with them. Just one, how's everything going? How's the process going? How are your calls going? What are you running into? We'll set up some coaching one-on-ones. Here's what I would do. Here's some best practice I would put in play. And this is what I would do in terms of trying to separate myself from the competition and really be a partner for these customers. You're not just trying to be someone that's just going to, be a transactional rate every single time. But it's really, instead of, hey, what are you moving today? Can I quote something for you? It's like, tell me about your process. You want to find out who's involved, what's important to them as well too, when they're considering bringing on a new potential freight vendor. Why are they in that position? What do they look for? And then just having that dialogue with them, where you're just not going to be, someone that they're used to getting the 30 previous calls from earlier that day from every other broker out there. How are you going to be ingrained with them to be an actual partner with them, or not just, I may have them 1 month and they be gone the second, be gone the next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you're creating you want to create a way to differentiate yourself, rather than the guy who's just looking to book a load. And if you don't do that, you're not going to win long-term business. So. Yeah.
And anyone who's been in the industry for a number of years, they've obviously have done stuff to make them successful, because, it is tough to get going. I mean, it really is a grind, but I feel like it's tough to get going in any sales industry. Yeah. A lot of industries are competitive. There's a lot of different options. And how are you going to separate yourself? How are you going to treat people? What kind of, transparency are you going to give them once you have loads tendered to them? And, because we always try to avoid the phone call of, you never want to receive a phone call from a customer saying, hey, Sean, where's that truck at? Hey, I need an update on these loads. You always want to be that proactive person where you're eliminating that call from every customer. Because again, once you have that relationship developed with the customer, you want to make sure that, once they tender freight to you, they can take that off their plate. They know you've got it handled, and they're going to be proactive. They can check, every single morning. They've got a tracking report that show them where all their freight's at, what their ETAs are, what the clear expectations are for every single load. So, I mean, there's little things you can do, but the big thing we want to tell agents is, there's a great opportunity with people that are entrepreneurial, that want to bet on themselves and maximize their potential, that they're not going to do it alone. They're not going to fly solo. You're going to have good software in the background, but better that you're going to have good people top to bottom. And again, that starts with our owner, Damon Anderson, and our co-owner, David Barnes. I mean, they'll go to bat for you, because once you come on board, you are considered part of the family, and we want everyone to be successful, because everyone's got their own personal story about how they got into the industry and where they're at now because of it. And we want to make sure everyone can share in that same experience and make an impact in their life long term.
One of the things that stuck out that you talked about was, just people and culture. And I've recruited a lot of people, thousands of people. And even if you look at, data and my own personal data, there's typically a few things that stand out on most important things when considering a career or career change. And the top ones are pay, as well as who you work with. So one of the most important things, I ran a poll recently on LinkedIn, and it confirmed this. It's like who you work for is more important than anything. So your leader, your boss. And then the next one typically is culture, right? Culture or mission. You spoke to all of those things. I always consider people like, hey, who are you working for, right? If you're working alongside somebody that you can trust, and you know that they're an expert, they're going to get down in the trenches with you, they want you to succeed, that's a good place to be, right? If you can make the kind of money that you want, that's a good place to be. If you're doing something for a good reason, right? With a good purpose, it's a good place to be. And sounds like you got all those elements. So that's great.
Well, and also with our environment, we have so many people that work from home. We have agents all across the United States. We even have an agent in Ecuador. So it's all encompassing. So it's almost you have to take it to the next level to really build those relationships. Because a lot of these people, I mean, barring with the pandemic happening in 2020, we still try to get together with everybody at least once a year when we can. But the
trip to Ecuador, is that what you guys are going to do?
Trip to Ecuador, yeah, it's pretty commonplace. I'll have to run that up the flagpole. But no, we'll always try to get people to come into Kansas City, and again, and that goes up to the mindset that's set with the owner is, we want to see these people. We want to reward them. We want to get to know them, know their families, their spouses, their kids. And, but when you're remotely, majority of that's over the phone, so obviously it's a whole different story when you're trying to, foster those good relationships, have good dialogue with them when it's strictly over the phone and not face to face.
Absolutely. Well, awesome. And I've appreciated all of the insight that you've kind of laid out here. I have a lot of people from different realms here, who listen. If you were looking back at, maybe like your 20-year-old self, what advice would you give them, on just career, steps to take, what would you tell your 20-year-old self?
It's a good question. Looking back on it, and what I would tell my 20-year-old self or any new professional getting into any industry is soak up as much information as you can. Always take the approach of trying to help out. If you've gotten your workload, your caseload, whatever, if you got to complete, ask for more responsibility. Even if you're not ready for it, take on more responsibility, learn for it, ask for help when you need it. Try to find a mentor, someone that's going to have your best interest, that will kind of take you under the ring, show you how to do stuff, someone you can confide to when you're having one of those days, that can kind of walk you through their experience. But I'd always just say, come in and try to learn as much as you can. Again, take on as much responsibility and have a positive attitude. No matter what happens, have a positive attitude, because I'll always take somebody who's going to give me 100% effort with a good attitude, and I can try to coach them or find a spot for them any single day. But because they're going to impact everybody that's around you. They're going to have, they'll impact you when you're having a down day. They might say something that cheers you up, and it just may be a light switch that turns on for you. And next thing you know, hey, my day is getting better now too. So I would say work hard, ask for more responsibility, whether you're ready for it or not, and be positive.
That's good insight. I tell candidates a lot, like whether people agree with this or not, I 100% believe it's true. Likability and positivity are infectious, and they are decision makers for companies every single day. Like if I've got two people who are equally talented and one is more likable, one is more positive, this person over here is going to get the job over this person who's not as likable.
Oh, for sure.
So just figure that out. Figure out how to be likable, figure out how to be positive.
For sure. Actually, one more thing I'll add to it as well too, especially when you're new to an industry, you're going to mess up all the time. You're going to make mistakes all the time. But as you're working through those mistakes, make sure you look internally first at yourself before we start giving excuses, because it's very, very easy to do. I'm guilty of it as well too. But then when you look internally about what you did, what happened throughout the situation, how are you going to learn from it, taking that type of approach and then executing on it will also go a long way for you as well.
I'll agree with that. Second that, like, that's such a good insight. I can remember earlier in my career, looking for people I wanted to blame when, some people I had to be like, it's this guy right here.
Yeah, get a mirror.
Yeah,
get a mirror. There you go.
Best thing I ever learned. Cool. And so that was great insight. Couple of books. Is there a book or a book that has impacted you in your career that you would recommend to? And I would say not just young people, but even leaders as well, that has been impactful or helpful for you.
Well, it's funny. I thought about that, and it really came to a book I just finished about 2 or 3 months ago, and it's called Legacy. Okay. And it's about the All Blacks rugby team. It was written in 2015, and I forget the author off the top of my head, but it's a great little book. It's about accountability. It's about humility. It's about leaving the place better when you leave than when you first got there. It was just great. It was when Mike Matheny took over the Royals. It was the first book that he sent out to all the players, I think on the 40-man roster, and made them read. And that's how I heard about it. And a friend told me about it as well too. But I thought that book was just solid. It was just really, really good. Books I'm reading now, I just started reading Jocko's book, Discipline Equals Freedom, which is like, I mean, it's like getting yelled at by a drill sergeant, but it's like that little kick in the butt type of book that you need, that kind of is like, no matter what the obstacle is, you can get through it. Your mind will let you get through it. And then as we were discussing off air, I'm reading a book with, the pandemic and everything going on. It's about the great influenza of 1919. Obviously it's more of a historical basis, but it's almost mind blowing, just reading back what it was just going back 100 years ago with regards to, medical practices, how they approached everything and how it's handled now. So, new books, whether it's historical or leadership books, I do like them. And again, I go through phases where I'm just hooked on books, then I'm hooked on podcasts and back and forth, but those are the most recent ones that I read that I would recommend, but definitely Legacy for sure. It's a good book, good read, and a lot of stuff you can take out of it and make it actionable.
Legacy will add to the show notes there for sure. Historical books too, I think, are great just because the more you learn there, just the perspective that you can gain is really helpful. Just kind of understanding, A, where we've come from, but B, also appreciating what we have and how things are. It's so easy to just forget about stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree. I love history. One of my favorite historical books is Killer Angels. It's about the Battle of Gettysburg. But it's amazing to read what people went through not that long ago, and how fortunate and how lucky we have. We're basically walking around with computers in our pockets 24/7, and not that long ago, electricity was a luxury. So, definitely being thankful for, every gift that you have now, and, just know in a moment it could all be taken away, but, just don't let any day go to waste.
No doubt. Sean, I've appreciated the heck out of our conversation. If people want to get in touch with you, just to connect or maybe learn about Tallgrass, where should they go?
Sure. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn. Go to tallgrassfreight.com. Our website's got a lot of great information. It'll show you some profiles of our leadership team, kind of their background, what they're about, information about who we are as a company. Anybody that's interested, that's got a solid logistics background that's ready to kind of take that next leap and bet on themselves and maximize their potential, reach out to me. I'd love to have a conversation with you, kind of give you some insight about what we're looking for, who we're all about, and see if we're a good fit for you guys. So, but thank you very much for having me on your podcast. I love what you're doing. I've loved your past conversations, so keep it up.
Cool, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for being on.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks for listening to the Recruiting Stories podcast. If you haven't yet, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Check us out on LinkedIn. Adrian Chapman and Cover 3 Consulting is our company page. Also check out our website, www.cov3consulting.com. Again, thanks for joining us, and we just simply want to remind you that you can change the world by putting people in a position where they can do the most good, and you do that by recruiting. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.